Snow fell like sifted flour over London the night the Duke of Wexford entered Carlton House, its glittering windows blazing against the winter dark, its corridors humming with the bright, brittle laughter of England's most formidable aristocrats. The year was 1807, a time when whispers traveled faster than carriages and a single rumor could slice through a reputation as cleanly as a blade. As the Prince Regent's grand ball unfurled in gold and candlelight, the Duke moved through the throng with the calm dignity of a man accustomed to scrutiny, yet privately exhausted by it. His marriage, 3 months old and already dissected by London society, hovered like a silent shadow behind him. He had wed for diplomacy, for alliance, for duty, words hammered into him since childhood. He had not married for affection, and that absence grew heavier with each passing day. The Duchess stood across the ballroom beneath a chandelier shaped like a frozen waterfall, its crystals scattering light over her pale blue gown. She looked serene, composed, almost regal in her stillness, yet something fragile shimmered beneath her calm expression. Her gloved hands were folded neatly before her, a posture that suggested elegance but also vigilance, as though she felt the eyes of every guest scraping across her skin. She glanced once toward her husband, a fleeting look of uncertain recognition, as if unsure whether he would welcome her gaze or regard it as an intrusion. He returned the glance with an equally fleeting nod, formal and distant. Their marriage had become a dance of politeness, a choreography learned quickly because sincerity had no room to flourish in a union built on political negotiations. Yet beneath the Duke's restraint burned a quiet ache for something he feared was foolish to name: understanding, companionship, perhaps even tenderness. But he had long believed such desires belonged to men with simpler lives than his own. As the orchestra swelled, courtiers drifted like restless birds, their feathers, real and metaphorical, quivering with excitement at fresh gossip. While couples glided across the polished floor, conversation sharpened into murmurs that slid through the air with needle-like precision. The Duke caught a fragment near him, delivered by a pair of ladies whose smiles were knives sheathed in silk. "A cold match, is it not?" one said. "She rarely speaks to him. One wonders if affection has abandoned their household entirely." The other replied with a touch of false sympathy. "A marriage forged in strategy is not always a marriage at all." The Duke pretended not to hear. He had been trained to ignore idle cruelty, yet it stung with surprising force. He felt the faintest tightening across his ribs, as if the fabric of his waistcoat had shrunk. Shame, unwelcome and unfamiliar, crept into his chest, not because he believed the speculation, but because the fragility of his wife's position mirrored the fragility of his own. He was a duke, but he was not invulnerable. And she, though raised to bear scrutiny, was far too gentle to endure such barbed whispers without cost. He made his way toward the refreshment table, desperate for a moment of solitude, when a soft voice brushed his ear like a ghost of breath. "Your Grace," it murmured. He turned to find a young lady-in-waiting standing half-hidden behind a marble column. Her complexion was pale as candle smoke, her hands trembling so violently that the fan she held fluttered like the wings of a frightened bird. She glanced around before speaking again, her gaze darting between him and the shifting crowd. "Forgive me, sir, but I must speak with urgency." The Duke straightened, instinct sharpening. Though her rank was several dozen steps beneath his, there was something piercing in her expression, fear mixed with guilt, the sort of expression worn only by those who had witnessed something too heavy to bear alone. "What troubles you?" he asked quietly. Her throat bobbed. "Your wife is betraying you," she whispered, each word falling with the weight of a stone. "And you will not like what comes next." The ballroom seemed to contract around him. Music blurred into indistinct sound, laughter receded to a distant ringing, and the golden light suddenly felt colder. For a moment he thought he had misheard, but the young woman's trembling confirmed otherwise. Betraying him? Impossible, or perhaps merely unimaginable, which was its own kind of danger. Before he could question her, she curtsied in a hurried, trembling motion and slipped back into the sea of dancers, swallowed by silk and shadow. The Duke stood frozen, his breath caught between disbelief and dread. His eyes sought the Duchess again. She was speaking with an elderly noblewoman, her posture perfect, her smile polite, her expression unreadable. Betrayal did not fit her features. Yet sincerity did not rest easily there either, for he had never truly known her. Had she concealed secrets? Had his indifference driven her toward another confidant? Or had someone twisted her into a pawn without his knowledge? His pulse beat a steady, painful rhythm. Honor demanded caution. Dignity demanded restraint. Yet emotion, quiet, wounded, ancient, demanded truth. He moved toward the edge of the ballroom, needing distance from the noise, when the narrator's invisible commentary seemed to echo through the gilded corridors of his memory. In an era where alliances shifted with the swiftness of ink on parchment, even a whisper could unmake a household. And the Duke, though noble in title, was still a man built of vulnerable flesh and uncertain hopes. He paused near a tall window streaked with winter frost and gazed again across the room. His wife's laugh, light, brief, cautious, carried to him like a fragile bell. His heart clenched with a strange, conflicting ache, fear of what she might be hiding, and fear of what he might lose if the whisper held truth. The Prince Regent, oblivious to the tension threading the evening, called for a new dance. The Duchess stepped forward, the skirts of her gown rippling like moonlit water. She did not look toward her husband. Or perhaps she dared not. The Duke exhaled slowly. The whisper had cracked the shell of their polite marriage, and through that crack poured doubts, questions, and a strange, unexpected longing to understand the woman fate had bound to him. Whether the whisper revealed treachery or tragedy, one truth had already taken root. He could no longer remain a silent observer in his own marriage. And as the music rose, he knew with chilling clarity that the night had already begun to change irreversibly. Morning came to Wexford House like a quiet verdict, pale light slipping through lace curtains to reveal a day suddenly heavy with questions the Duke could no longer ignore. He woke with the whisper burning behind his eyes, a small, persistent flame that refused to be extinguished by reason or habit. His wife slept in the adjoining chamber, her breath steady, her presence at once familiar and painfully distant, and he felt for the first time in their brief marriage the ache of not knowing her at all. Duty had trained him to assess threats, to measure intentions, yet none of his disciplined instincts prepared him for the trembling uncertainty that now coiled beneath his ribs. When he dressed, the rustle of cloth sounded like accusation. He made his way to her writing desk, not out of distrust but out of desperation to understand the danger that might surround them both. The desk was neat, almost severe, yet when he lifted a wooden tray he discovered a small bundle composed of a silk ribbon wound around a sealed letter, the wax pressed with an unfamiliar crest. The ribbon carried a scent faint as winter rosemary, a scent that stirred memory despite his efforts. She had once worn a sprig tucked at her wrist when visiting the chapel, a gesture so shy it had almost escaped notice. The discovery startled him more deeply than the letter itself, for it revealed a private self he had never been invited to witness. He did not break the seal. Instead, he held the bundle as though it might whisper further truths merely by being touched. At that moment the Duchess entered, her steps light but hurried, her hands clasped as though to restrain flight. Her eyes widened when she saw the ribbon in his fingers, and a flush, quick, embarrassed, painfully sincere, rose beneath her porcelain complexion. "I did not mean for you to find it," she said, each syllable shaped by fear and humility. The Duke set the bundle upon the desk, his movements deliberate, gentle, offering an unspoken reassurance he could not yet voice. "Are you in peril?" he asked. His tone carried no judgment, only concern, and she blinked as though such concern were a foreign language she had never expected to hear. She drew a breath, trembling but resolved. I feared you would think me faithless. I feared I would have no place in this house if the truth came to light." Her fingers brushed the edge of the desk, seeking steadiness. "It is not betrayal in the manner you imagine. It is obligation. It is pressure. It is the shadow of my uncle's ambition pressing upon me until refusal would have destroyed all I hold dear." Her eyes shone not with defiance but with wearied honesty, and for a moment the Duke felt his own accusations crumble like dust. Before he could answer, a footman hurried through the doorway, cheeks flushed with scandalous triumph. "Your Grace," the servants whisper that Her Grace writes to Mr. Everley, that dangerous Whig who was expelled from Parliament last year. The words landed like pebbles in a still pond, sending ripples of alarm through the room. The Duchess went utterly still, her breath arrested, her hands rising instinctively to shield her face as though she could ward off gossip by sheer will. The Duke stepped forward, placing himself between her and the footman's eager gaze. "You will hold your tongue," he commanded, not loudly, yet with a steel that left no room for defiance. The footman retreated, chastened, yet the damage was done. Rumor, once loosed, always outran truth. When silence returned, it pressed upon them with unbearable weight. The Duchess lowered her hands slowly. "I have not written to him of politics," she whispered. "Only of charity, of the poor families displaced by his foolish zeal. He asked for aid. I cannot turn from those who suffer, whatever their party." Her voice cracked upon the last word, revealing the moral compass beneath her delicacy. The Duke felt something shift, an unexpected swell of admiration, warm and alarming. Then you acted according to conscience, he said, though his mind raced through consequences. Charity could be interpreted as conspiracy when viewed through the lens of partisan fear. Yet there was in her defense a courage he had never recognized. She did not plead for absolution, she simply spoke the truth and braced for judgment. He picked up the pressed winter rose that had slipped from her reticule upon entering. Its petals, brittle yet fragrant, carried the memory of a garden he had once walked alone, believing companionship beyond his reach. He pressed it carefully between two blank pages of his own journal, a gesture half unconscious, half ceremonial, as though sealing a promise he did not yet have words for. "Why give this to me?" he asked softly. She met his gaze, vulnerable as glass yet unbroken. "Because I wished you might know that I do not despise the life fate granted us. I wished you might feel, even faintly, that I am grateful for your kindness, even when I have been too afraid to return it." The confession struck him with gentle force, a revelation more dangerous than any coded letter. For in that moment he understood that scandal, danger, and political intrigue mattered little compared to the trembling possibility that love might yet bloom where duty had first planted barren soil. Outside, the bells tolled noon, carrying across the gravel paths a sound both mournful and hopeful. The Duke reached for the rose again, then paused, mindful of decorum, mindful of the fragile trust forming between them. "We must face whatever comes," he said, "but we shall face it together." The words tasted like courage and like promise. She inhaled sharply as though the world had tilted, and then nodded, a small gesture that nonetheless felt like stepping across a threshold into a future neither could yet imagine. When evening drew, fog wrapped the gardens of Wexford House in silver hush when the Duke followed the faint echo of his wife's steps beyond the lantern glow, his heart beating with a mixture of trepidation and resolve that felt almost foreign upon his tongue. The gravel crunched softly beneath her slippers, a sound of hesitation she would have hidden from any other witness, yet not from him who had finally learned to listen beyond posture and politeness. She paused beneath an ancient yew, where moonlight shaped her silhouette into something fragile, almost ethereal, and in that wavering radiance she drew forth a small packet sealed with the same crest as the letter he had found earlier. The sight tightened his chest, not with fury but with the sharp sting of wanting honesty more than certainty, wanting communion more than comfort. He stepped forward, the gesture deliberate, offering presence without judgment, and she started as though caught in an act she could not name without shattering. "My lady," he said, keeping his voice low enough to cradle, yet firm enough to reassure, "whatever burden you carry, place it before me without fear." Her fingers trembled upon the packet, then released it as though the weight were suddenly unbearable, and it dropped to the moss with a muted thud that sounded louder than treason in the stillness. She pressed her lips together, fighting emotion with a discipline that could not hold against the storm rising within her eyes. "I cannot," she whispered, though the word broke like glass, "I cannot pretend any longer that silence protects us." The confession unfurled between them like smoke given shape by truth, delicate yet impossible to ignore. The Duke knelt, not from authority but from humility, lifting the packet and turning it upon his palm as though it were a living thing awaiting mercy. "Then let us speak plainly," he answered, feeling his own barriers unmoor, "for I would rather face danger beside you than safety alone." Her breath shuddered, a sound half pain and half relief, and she sank onto a stone bench as though her strength had been drained by honesty itself. "My uncle," she began, each word drawn slowly from a well of long repression, "used my position to force me into service I never sought, pressing me to carry messages, to soothe uneasy allies, to soften minds aching for reform. When I refused, he threatened to expose matters that would ruin not myself but those I love, matters none here should ever hear spoken." Her gaze lowered, ashamed not of guilt but of helplessness, and the Duke felt a fierce tenderness flare as unexpectedly as flame meeting dry parchment. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, though the question carried no accusation, only longing for inclusion in a life she had been taught to shield alone. She lifted her eyes, shining with unshed tears she would not allow to fall, for dignity was the last garment she could still claim as her own. "Because you seemed so distant," she admitted, voice trembling like a candle in draught, "and I feared that honesty would make me unbearable to you, that you would look upon me not as wife but as liability." The words pierced him deeper than any political blade could have managed, for they revealed a loneliness mirroring his own, a canyon carved by decorum and misunderstanding. He reached for her hand, slowly enough to allow refusal, gently enough to let hope blossom without pressure, and felt her fingers fold into his with shy certainty that stole his breath. "You have been unbearable only to yourself," he said, struggling to shape truth into kindness, "for I have longed to know you, yet lacked courage to demand what duty forbade me to request. She lips parted in astonishment, and a shy smile, small as dawn, lit her face with warmth that threatened to rewrite every rule she had been taught to obey. Together they opened the packet, revealing not treason but a plea for aid from families caught in political crossfire, written in earnest, aching script that spoke of hunger and despair. The Duke felt clarity wash through him, sweeping away the last residue of suspicion, replacing it with a conviction that moral courage and marital loyalty were not opposing forces but twin pillars holding up the same heaven. "Then we shall answer this plea," he declared, his voice carrying a firmness born of purpose rather than pride, "and we shall do so openly, for charity is no crime and conscience no conspiracy." She blinked, overwhelmed, as though she had been given permission to breathe after years of holding air like forbidden treasure. "Do you truly mean it?" she asked, her tone trembling with incredulous joy. "I do," he answered, tightening his hold upon her hand, feeling in that simple contact a covenant more binding than any parchment. The garden, witness to so many silent sighs, seemed to exhale around them, the fog thinning to reveal distant stars that glimmered like shy promises of a future yet unwritten. She leaned toward him, not boldly but with all the courage her heart could muster, and whispered, "Then trust me as I trust you." The words wrapped themselves around him like velvet and steel, soft and unbreakable in equal measure, and he bowed his head in acceptance, feeling a warmth spread through him that no political triumph could ever supply. "I do," he said, and in that declaration felt the last wall between them crumble with gentle grace. They sat thus for a long moment, hands entwined, hearts aligned in newfound purpose, listening to the night continue its patient vigil, unaware that it sheltered the birth of something precious and perilous in equal measure. When she finally stood, drawing a steadying breath, she tucked the packet against her heart as though it were no longer an instrument of obligation but of partnership. Together they stepped forward into whatever fate demanded next for their new shared tomorrow. Rain slicked the cobbles beneath the carriage house when the Duke and Duchess arrived, carrying with them a courage born not of duty alone but of companionship newly discovered and fiercely cherished. Lanterns guttered in trembling halos of gold, revealing shadows that danced like wary spirits around the abandoned timbers, and within those shifting dark forms waited James Everley, his posture too relaxed for a man confessing to treason. He turned as they stepped from the carriage, a smile cutting across his face like thin ice beneath careless steps. "Back again, Your Grace," he drawled, his voice wrapped in playful venom, "still blind enough to defend her brilliance even when it conspires against you." The Duchess drew breath to protest, but the Duke lifted a single hand, not in command yet in quiet certainty that stilled both accusation and panic alike. "You mistake loyalty for blindness," he answered, each word shaped with calm steel, "and affection for folly. I see more clearly now than ever, and I choose what I see." Everley's grin faltered, the first crack in his practiced defiance, yet his eyes narrowed when the Duchess stepped forward, her chin rising with moral fire she had long suppressed beneath humility. "I will not be used," she said, voice trembling not from fear but from resolve, "not by my uncle, not by you, not by anyone who would turn charity into a weapon." The syllables carried the ring of truth so pure that even the rattling lanterns seemed to bow in acknowledgement. Everley laughed, sharp and brittle. "Then you will consign those families to hunger, Lady Wexford, in exchange for decorum and comfort." The accusation sliced through the night, yet before despair could take root, the Duke moved beside her, his presence a wall of warmth against the chilling implication. "No," he said, stepping into the light, "we shall answer hunger without surrendering conscience, and we shall do so publicly, openly, beyond the reach of men who profit from secrecy." His declaration unfurled like a banner, stirring something in the Duchess that felt dangerously close to joy, a feeling so foreign it made her breath catch as though she were tasting sunlight for the first time after years within stone corridors. Everley spat upon the cobbles, fury rising like smoke. "You cannot expose me without ruin," he hissed, "and you cannot expose yourself without scandal." The Duke met his gaze, unflinching. "Then let us choose ruin over corruption, for scandal is a small price compared to injustice." The words hung in the air like a verdict delivered by some ancient tribunal, and in their wake Everley's bravado collapsed, revealing desperation like a wound too long hidden. The Duchess stepped beyond him then, lifting the packet she carried as though it were a relic capable of rewriting destinies. "This is evidence," she said softly but unmistakably, "of coercion, of exploitation, of crimes that would stain any house that sheltered them. I give it not to condemn but to heal, to ensure that those who suffer shall be heard without being weaponized." Her fingers steadied as she offered the packet to an unseen ally she knew would arrive at the appointed whisper of time, a friend within the civil service who had pledged fairness before partisanship. When the shadow of that ally stepped into the lamplight, Everley recoiled as though the sight itself burned him, his grand theories dissolving into dust before practical justice. "This ends," the Duke said, not triumphing, merely acknowledging truth. Everley turned, defeated not by force but by revelation, and fled into the rain, leaving behind only the scent of ambition stripped bare. Silence followed, deep and cleansing. Rain composed a gentle percussion upon timber and stone, a lullaby for weary hearts. The ally bent to collect the packet, offering gratitude without ostentation, then vanished as quietly as he had come, carrying with him the promise of reform and the weight of responsibility. The Duchess exhaled, a sound shaped like release after years of holding breath against unseen pressure. "I did not know I could feel such terror and such relief at once," she confessed, hands clasping before her as though she might anchor herself to the moment. The Duke regarded her, his expression softened into something unmarred by duty, polished instead by affection blooming beyond reason. "You have borne more alone than any should," he said, stepping nearer, "and you need not bear it alone again." His hand reached for hers, and this time she did not hesitate, letting their fingers intertwine with a trust that felt like covenant written upon living pulse. She turned her face toward him, cheeks flushed not from cold but from emotion she could no longer restrain. "I feared being unbearable to you," she murmured, the confession trembling like a moth against flame, "yet you have shown me that honesty is the only sweetness worth tasting." His breath caught, and in that suspended space between heartbeat and courage he spoke words that felt inevitable as sunrise. "Then allow me to declare what I have long felt yet lacked courage to name. I choose you not as obligation, not as alliance, but as the companion my heart has been seeking without knowing how to ask." Each phrase unfurled gently, yet with the certainty of stone set upon foundation. The Duchess closed her eyes, allowing warmth to wash through her like music played upon hidden strings. When she opened them, they shone with a light untamed by court or caution. "Then I choose you as well," she whispered, and the simplicity of the exchange carried a power no proclamation could equal. They stepped toward the carriage, the rain now softened into glitter upon their cloaks, turning the world into a mosaic of small miracles. Within the cramped warmth of the carriage they sat close, yet decorum remained, a tender boundary not of fear but of reverence. Outside, wheels rolled toward home, toward spring yet to come, toward a future no longer written solely by